After losing the One Ring to King Isildur, Sauron was defeated and the Tower of Barad-dûr was levelled to the ground. Thereafter, the men of the West set up outposts to watch over Mordor, while Sauron's subjects were rid of his tyranny for a time, as their vanquished lord fled into the east to regain his strength. Yet, by the dawn of the Third Age, Sauron had recovered his strength, re-emerging into the lands of the free peoples of Middle-earth with a new strategy to wear them down through proxies in a war of attrition. However, he had one major obstacle standing in his way: his lost One Ring. Sauron had to reclaim it before one of his foes seized it and used it against him. Despite meticulous planning and overwhelming superiority in armed forces, Sauron's obsession with the One Ring would ultimately be the undoing of Mordor. Welcome to our latest video on the armies and military customs of Middle-earth, in which we will explore how Sauron built up an army with which he planned to destroy the Free Peoples, and why he ultimately failed in his goals. And if you ever wanted to come pretty close to meeting some hobbits in real life, check out our sponsor for this video, Fan Fusion Phoenix, the indie pop culture convention that's gathering real fans in Phoenix, Arizona, June 6th to 8th, 2025. We don't just mean meeting Hobbit cosplayers either, because Elijah Wood will be leading all 4 of the Lord of the Rings Hobbits as special guests. They'll be joined by Simon Pegg from Shaun of the Dead, Katie Seagal from Futurama, Charlie Cox from Daredevil, and the list goes on. It's also going to be overflowing with gaming, with live arcade cabinets to play, the game Tabletopia, an arena of tabletop action, as well as board games, card games, and D&D. It's not only family friendly with loads of games, art and activities, but kids under 12 get in for free. And backed by popular demand, Fan Fusion Phoenix will feature a wrestling extravaganza of heroes and villains battling it out. You probably also noticed the cosplay. Yep, there'll be cosplay, suffice to say, bring your own too. You can get all the details and see all the scheduled action by heading to phoenixfanfusion.com, link in the description. The land of Mordor was strategically sheltered on 3 sides by the mountain ranges Ered Lithwy and Ethel Duath. During the Second Age, Sauron constructed the Gates of Morannon in the Valley of Udun, serving as the sole entrance for large armies to the west. Upon his return in the Third Age, he captured key outposts from the Kingdom of Gondor, including the Towers of Teeth, Durthang, the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and Minas Ithil, which he renamed Minas Morgul. Adjacent to Morannon was Dagorlad, surrounded by the desolate plateau of Gorgoroth, the volcanic Mount Doom to the southwest, and the plain of Lithlad to the east. The western parts of Mordor were predominantly barren, with only sparse brambles. However, the region of Nirn in the south was somewhat more fertile, due to nutrient-rich ash from Mount Doom, which allowed for dry land farming even though the inland sea of Nirnen was salty rather than fresh. Mordor also had convenient access to nearby regions, including Harad to the south, Rhûn to the east, and Khand to the southeast, with the River Anduin providing easy water transport. Mordor's military strength was measured in hosts, armies, legions, companies, and bands, with Sauron serving as the commander-in-chief. Dark realms such as Dol Guldur, Angmar, the Misty Mountains, Rhûn, Khand, Harad, Umbar, and Isengard all pledged their loyalty to Mordor. Sauron's second-in-command was the fell being known as the Witch King, who ruled as the chief of the Nazgûl, king of Angmar and lord of Minas Morgul. His lieutenant, Khamûl, commanded Dol Guldur, while the other Nazgûl operated from Minas Morgul. The Mouth of Sauron, a black Númenórean, served as the lieutenant of Barad-dûr, and Sauron's personal emissary, potentially acting as his chief of staff. The main source of manpower in Sauron's armies was his orcs. Orcs were notoriously fractious and unreliable, particularly when they were beyond their master's reach. They often disobeyed orders and engaged in infighting. When Sauron rose as the Dark Lord, he faced numerous independent wild orc tribes that spoke various languages. To curb their internal conflicts, Sauron redirected their animosity towards external enemies, such as men and elves. Consolidating the Eastern Orcs proved to be a lengthy challenge, while the Northern Orcs of the Misty Mountains retained a significant degree of autonomy. Following his 2 deaths and the loss of the One Ring, Sauron's power had diminished considerably by the Third Age, necessitating the delegation of authority to various commanders. These leaders enforced discipline through fear and brutality, attempting to maintain control over the chaotic orc forces. he trusted the Witch King in Angmar and Khamûl in Dol Guldur to command their share of Orcish forces, while allowing the Misty Mountain tribes to follow independent leaders like Azog, Bolg, and the Great Goblin. It seems that Sauron also allowed Orcs and Uruk-hai to follow Saruman in Isengard, and perhaps Durin's Bane at Moria, as allowing them to do so fit in with his ultimate goals. However, Sauron's commanders often faced conflicting orders or personal rivalries, which led to internal strife. Even within the confines of Mordor, there existed separate commands. The Orcs of the Red Eye were a force under the direct service of Barad-dûr, whose gear carried the Red Eye symbol of Sauron. The Uruks of Mordor also carried the Banner of the Red Eye, but seemed to be their own collective. The Orcs of Minas Morgul carried a banner depicting a moon disfigured with a ghastly face of death, and were led by the Lords of Morgul. Sauron was originally a Valar known as Marion, a benevolent being who sought order and efficiency. However, Melkor's corruption twisted this ambition into a desire for control. Sauron's perfectionism led him to become a micromanager, instilling a culture of mistrust and espionage among his ranks. In referencing the hierarchy of Sauron's armies, Shagrat mentioned the top ones, referencing higher-ranking orcs or Nazgûl. He also spoke on how Sauron did not trust lower-ranking officers like him, and accused them of placing spies amongst his orcs. This centralized decision-making stifled initiative within the army, in contrast to the decentralized decision-making of the Free People's Forces, which often deliberated collectively. Sauron's failure to anticipate the destruction of the One Ring resulted in his surprise at the Battle of Morannon, highlighting the inefficiencies and limitations of his leadership style. The Orcs of Mordor constituted the majority of Sauron's army, comprising northern and eastern orcs, along with those bred by Sauron over millennia. Generally shorter than men, they possessed a strong but crooked physique, and were known for their fierce yet cowardly nature. Orcs relished in battle and excelled in confined spaces such as tunnel warfare, often serving as light infantry, archers, sappers, and petty officers. During the reign of Steward Denethor I of Gondor, a new type of orc called Uruks was secretly bred. These black orcs were stronger than their normal counterparts, with some rising to be as tall as men, with slanting eyes, thick legs, and immunity to sunlight. Uruks were more reliable and capable of wielding heavier weapons than standard orcs. The Uruk-hai, loyal to Saruman, carried broad-bladed swords, large shields, and bows of yew wood, indicating their formidable capabilities. Uruks often formed elite units and comprised a significant portion of Sauron's officer corps. In addition to Uruks, Sauron also bred a new breed of troll, known as Olog-hai, during the late Third Age. These trolls were larger, stronger, more intelligent, and resistant to sunlight. Taller than men and covered in tough scales, they wielded large hammers and bucklers, and were trained to speak the Black Speech. Olog-hai served as heavy shock troops and operators of Sauron's siege weaponry. The land of Mordor possessed a limited air force in the form of fell beasts, which were large winged creatures with beaks and claws, ridden by the Nazgûl. With speed surpassing the wind, these beasts could capture and drop enemies or crush them from the sky, serving as both air support and a swift line of communication. While orcs could tame and ride wolves and wargs, Mordor did not seem to possess any cavalry. Instead, Mordor augmented its forces with mounted units from the Easterlings and Southrons, who provided light and heavy shock cavalry respectively, the latter known for their use of Mumakil. Mordor lacked a navy and instead relied on the Corsairs of Umbar, who operated as pirates and raiders along the coast. Given that Morgoth's servants feared the open ocean, it's likely the Corsairs transported orcs, focusing instead on harassing Mordor's enemies. Lastly, a small number of Black Númenóreans, likely from Harad, served in Mordor's military, with prominent figures like the Mouth of Sauron exerting substantial control in the region. Sauron chose Mordor as his dwelling due to the volcanic fires of Mount Doom, which powered his mines and forges in Gorgoroth. The Orcs of Mordor were skilled craftsmen, capable of forging a wide range of weapons, including axes, hammers, daggers, spears, scimitars, and instruments of torture. For armor, they preferred robust ring mail, iron helmets, and small shields. Prisoners and slaves from Nirn potentially aided in the production of weapons and armor. Orcs were second only to dwarves in the art of mining and sapping, and likely crafted weapons for men, supporting their Easterling and Sauron allies in exchange for tributes and slaves. Mordor's forces included numerous siege engines, such as catapults, siege towers, and Grond, the battering ram shaped like a wolf's head and made of fireproof black steel. Moving these war machines required beasts of burden, such as trolls, who armed the catapults and operated the Grond. The Nazgul wielded a deadly weapon known as Black Breath, a poison that plunged its victims into a dark, unrecoverable sleep. This poison nearly incapacitated Merry, Éowyn and Faramir, but Aragorn's use of Athelas saved them. The archers among the Haradrim also weaponized the Black Breath on their arrows, indicating that Sauron was willing to share this dark power among Mordor's allies. Likewise, the Nazgul may have possessed weaponry such as Morgul knives that turned their victims into wraiths. Sauron and the Nazgul wielded the power of shadow, which was capable of corrupting others. On March 10th of TA 3019, Sauron unleashed one of his greatest weapons, a dawnless day, a veil of darkness that enveloped Gondor and Rohan, allowing his forces to operate freely and striking fear into the hearts of the free peoples who beheld the endless night. The most powerful weapon in Mordor, albeit one which was missing as of the Third Age, was Sauron's One Ring. When worn by Sauron, it enabled him to dominate other beings' wills and control the thoughts of any other ring-bearers, making him nearly invincible. However, Sauron made a critical error when forging the One Ring when he infused a significant portion of his power into it. This act both strengthened and weakened him, trapping Sauron in a scarred form that limited his mobility and forced him to depend on corrupted beings for warfare. Similarly, Sauron became bound to the One Ring, allowing him to reincarnate after death, though each return took longer than the last. If the One Ring were destroyed, then Sauron's ability to return would be severely diminished, a fate that Saruman would have faced had he successfully created his own Ring of Power. When drawing up formations for open battle, Mordor's orc-dominated army relied heavily on swarming tactics, such as human wave attacks, to overwhelm superior foes with sheer numbers. The battlefield terrain played a crucial role in their combat effectiveness, as orcs thrived in confined spaces, including underground areas, hills, and dark environments like Mirkwood's Canopy. Since Mordor lacked its own cavalry units, Sauron augmented his forces with Easterlings and Southrons to counter enemies on horseback. Logistically, trolls and beasts of burden were essential for transporting and operating heavy siege machinery, while fell beast-riding Nazgul provided superior reconnaissance. Sauron had the numbers and tactical advantages needed to win against the West. However, his flawed strategies ultimately led to failure. During the Second Age, Sauron employed a divide-and-conquer strategy, but dispersed his forces across multiple fronts, allowing his enemies to unite and defeat him. After a millennium of reflection, he returned in the Third Age with a new approach, opting to weaken his foes through proxies, while covertly seeking the One Ring. Throughout the Third Age, Sauron forged alliances and established realms to undermine the West. Angmar was to be pitted against Arnor, Dol Guldur against the Woodland Realm, and the Orcs of the Misty Mountains against Lindon, Rivendell, Eriador, the Beornings, and Woodmen. Simultaneously, Isengard would be unleashed upon the Kingdom of Rohan and the Easterlings against Erebor and Dale, while Sauron himself focused upon dismantling the Kingdom of Gondor. Sauron also engaged in asymmetrical warfare, inciting civil strife in Arnor and Gondor, poisoning Greenwood the Great, and unleashing a great plague and a long winter to depopulate the West. Sauron's campaigns were very successful, and before long, the elves were departing Middle-earth in droves, the dwarves were migrating west in isolation, and the population of men was declining. However, Sauron's obsession with reclaiming the One Ring was hampering these efforts. Fearful that someone would claim the One Ring and turn it against him, Sauron dispatched his greatest lieutenants, including the Witch King and Khamûl, to hunt for the ring. This decision led to a loss of effective command, and exposed his greatest weakness to his enemies, enabling the Council of Elrond to form the Fellowship of the Ring. In TA 3018, Sauron had significantly weakened the West and was encircling Gondor. However, when Pippin accidentally revealed himself to Sauron via the Orthanc Stone, Sauron mistakenly believed he possessed the One Ring, and dispatched forces to capture him. The following day, Aragorn touched the stone, revealing himself as the heir of Isildur and wielder of Andúril. Fearing his enemies at Minas Tirith had the One Ring, Sauron ordered the Witch King to launch an immediate assault on Gondor before they could utilize the One Ring's power, abandoning careful preparations to destroy his perceived enemies. This impulsive decision proved fatal, as the siege failed and Sauron's forces suffered heavy losses, including the death of his top lieutenant. Despite these setbacks, Mordor had substantial reserves remaining to eventually secure victory over the West. Sauron's forces managed to capture Frodo, yet he remained convinced that the One Ring was in Minas Tirith. This allowed Gandalf to exploit Sauron's fears by orchestrating an audacious plan that forced him to attack them outside Morannon. Under the false belief that the host of the West possessed the One Ring, Sauron could not resist launching an assault, ultimately facilitating Frodo, Sam and Gollum's success in destroying the ring and defeating Sauron. Mordor's ultimate flaw was the centralized power vested in Sauron. Had Sauron truly delegated authority to his lieutenants, perhaps they could have directed the war more efficiently. Sauron ultimately misunderstood his enemy's strategy, never considering that they would destroy the One Ring rather than use it against him. Had Sauron kept a defensive stance and patiently allowed the West to fade, he would have been victorious. Mordor's downfall ultimately stemmed from the perilous centralization of power under Sauron. This decision not only stifled his commander's initiative, but also created a dependency that hampered tactical flexibility. If Sauron had genuinely delegated authority to his lieutenants, they could have adapted strategies and responded more effectively to the dynamic nature of warfare. Furthermore, Sauron's most egregious failure was not understanding his adversary's desire to destroy the One Ring, rather than wield it as a weapon against him. This grave miscalculation reflects his arrogance and obsession, blinding him to the possibilities of defeat. Had Sauron maintained a more defensive posture and allowed the West to deplete their resources through protracted conflict, he might have eventually worn down his foes, as they were already facing numerous challenges. Instead, Sauron, ironically, fell victim to his own fears and made impulsive decisions, particularly in launching a hasty assault on Gondor, which precipitated catastrophic losses. More videos on Middle-earth are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.